Dr. Masuki is previously has been a curator at the Yamato Bunkakan Museum in Nara, has worked for the Agency for Cultural Affairs, taught at Kobe University before assuming his present position at the University of Tokyo last year. He's an associate professor specializing in the history of Japanese Buddhist painting, and he has published widely on the history of Heian Buddhist painting in particular, is one of the very few scholars who has studied the role of the history of the restoration of Buddhist paintings in Japan. So please join me in welcoming.
Thank you, Yukio-san. Thank you so much, Professor Mira, to invite me to such a great opportunity to present my research about the Japanese conservation history. So unfortunately, I had a strong jet lag, so it is very hard hour for me, and I'm afraid that my gray brain cell can work or not, but I must start. Today in my talk, I will discuss the conservation of Buddhist painting from the 9th to 12th centuries in Japan. We call this age the Heian period because during these centuries, the capital of Japan was located at Heian-kyo, what is now present day, Kyoto. This is a typical image of the Heian-kyo. So first, there is the issue of what exactly was conservation during the Heian period. How was this practice carried out? A survey of period sources suggests a difference between how people then and now understood the concept of conservation. This is the image of the conservation now, today. This reflects a divergence from how we know preserved painting. To state my conclusion first, there were two approaches to the conservation of Buddhist painting during the Heian period. The first approach was the preservation of the original, akin to how we understand conservation today. The other approach was to make a new copy of the original painting. Indeed, we find more examples of the latter copying approach as opposed to examples of conservation of the original painting. This is a noteworthy characteristic of the conservation of Buddhist painting during the Heian period. According to my research, there are very few historical documents that refer to people of the Heian period treating Buddhist paintings as precious objects that need to be preserved. For example, there was a pair of mandala that was given in 805 to the Japanese monk Kukai by his master Huiguo in Chang'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty. Kukai brought this pair of mandala back to Japan when he returned from China in 806. This was the first mandala in Japan. In prayer to produce a new pair of mandala from Konin 12, 821, Kukai writes, the silk of the first mandala is torn, the pigment have fallen off, and images of the Buddha have almost disappeared. Faced with such a situation, what do you suppose Kukai did? How did he conserve the precious mandala that was given to him by his teacher in Chang'an? The prayer continued by describing how Kukai ordered a new pair of mandala painted from the 4th month of the 821 to the 8th month of the same year. That is, Kukai ordered a new pair of mandala instead of conserving the older and the original mandala. Moreover, we have no further information about the first original mandala that was presented to Kukai by Master Fuiguo. Towards the end of this presentation, I will discuss the conservation of a third mandala, which is known as the Takao Mandara. You can see on the PowerPoint. The fragments of Takao Mandara were sealed in a box and neglected until the 14th century. I think that Kukai's first mandala was also likely left in a box and later lost without any trace. This might seem very strange as we now treat all the paintings as important treasures to conserve and preserve for future generations. Additionally, a survey of records of Buddhist rituals from the Heian period reveals that whenever painting was used as the main icon for a ritual, a new Buddhist painting was almost always prepared. In fact, only a few instances exist where old Buddhist paintings were used as the main icon of a ritual. For example, in the 12th century diary of nobleman Taira Nobunori, the entry from the 15th day of the 6th month of Nimpyo II, 1152, describes Fujiwara no Yorinaga holding a Buddhist ritual with a hanging scroll painting of Fudomyo. You can see the image of the hanging scroll of Fudomyo on your left. But the coordinator of the ritual, named Masanari, made a mistake and held the ritual with an old Buddhist icon. Nobunori criticized this mistake, commenting that it is a very inauspicious sign and extremely inappropriate. The inauspicious sign refers to the coordinator of the ritual mistakenly hanging an old Buddhist painting instead of a newly painted icon. This was one reason why the approach to conservation differed during the Heian period. In the case of another type of Buddhist image, however, conservation did not follow this same pattern. By repairing old Buddhist sculpture, one could acquire merit or build up good karma. In the diary of the late 11th, early 12th century nobleman, Fujiwara no Munetada, you can see the portrait of Munetada on your left hand. The conservation of an old Buddha sculpture is recorded on the 25th day of the 6th month of Jotoku II, 1098. Munetada writes, "The Buddha sculpture is an old one. I do not know whose work it is. It has lost its ornament and deteriorated over time. I was moved to tears upon seeing this old sculpture. As such, I will not make a new Buddha, but have this old icon conserved. I will place this Buddha icon close at hand and long worship it." Munetada thus preserved the old sculpture and used it as a portable icon. Furthermore, in the 11th century diary of Minamoto no Tsunenobu, there is a passage where the monk Ryoshin of Midera Temple describes how the conservation of an old Buddhist sculpture accumulated merit. This was the religious worldview that promoted the preservation of Buddhist sculpture. In relation to the record introduced above, we must recognize that the Heian period was a golden age for the production of Buddhist paintings, and painting skill and technique were among the pinnacle for Japanese art history. Such technical developments made people more prone to have new icons painted instead of deliberately repairing the ripped silk or other such damage on older paintings. As seen in Taira no Nobunori's diary, we can sometimes find examples of kobutsu or older Buddhist paintings. Rarely, however, is there a record of the preservation of an older Buddhist paintings, a situation that differs from the treatment of Buddhist sculpture. One of the first records that mentions the conservation of Buddhist painting during the Heian period comes from a letter written by Kukai in Konin 12th, 821. The letter is addressed to Fujiwara no Fuyutsugu, who was a minister of the Junna court. Judging from Kukai's letter, Fuyutsugu had asked Kukai to rend the portraits of the 5 Shingon patriarchs that were presented by Fuiguo to Kukai for the in Chang'an for the retired Emperor Soga to view. Kukai accepted this order, requesting that Fuyutsugu also conserve them. The humidity of our mountain temple is thick, and many of these portraits have thus been damaged. Having been salaried, I fear having them beheld by such an esteemed person. I presently request that if you could have a skilled artisan touch them up, I would be most relieved. This is an exceptional case whereupon the former emperor's request to view the original painting that Kukai brought with him from China, the court had them conserved. We can only find a few examples of the conservation of Buddhist painting during the Heian period, but these mostly refer to the conservation of earlier Buddhist paintings from before the Heian period, such as Nara period painting. The conservation of Kukai's contemporaneous painting was exceptional. For example, in Heian first, 987, 2 huge hanging scrolls of Buddhist embroidery dated to 754 that were displayed in the Great Buddha Hall of Todaiji Temple were conserved. You can see the Heian period, the Great Buddha Hall of Todaiji Temple, but unfortunately we cannot watch the inner space of the this Great Buddha Hall, so we cannot see the embroidery image. The monk painter Genjo is said to have supplemented the image of God of Earth. It is unclear whether this refers to conservation of the entire work, retouching of the original, or providing a sketch in order to produce new embroidery. Additionally, in Q1 4th, 1148, the monk painter Chinkai, who lived and worked in Todaiji Temple, conserved a painting of the Buddha preaching at Vulture Peak, which currently belongs to the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. The record of this conservation was written on the back of the work by Kanshin, the head priest of Todaiji. Kanshin states that this original mandala of the Hokkedo Hall is an authentic image of Vulture Peak painted in India. Unfortunately, the lower part under the Buddha is damaged. Some parts have been damaged by natural conditions over the time, while other parts have been cut off and taken by people. This painting is too old to know when it was painted. In this current 3rd month of Q1 4th, I ordered the monk Chinkai to repair this precious painting. Chinkai was chosen because he follows his family's tradition and has exceptional painting skill. For future posterity, I have recorded these rough details. This is to say that during its long history, the painting both suffered natural and artificial damage, with much of the lower part under the Buddha having been lost. Not until the great monk painter Chinkai son of the famous court painter Fujiwara no Motomitsu, was it conserved. As for the actual conservation, in his 1978 essay, Professor Terukazu Akiyama pointed out that there is some retouching to the incline silhouette of the rocks and trees in the landscape behind the Buddha. He concluded that these were traces of the Chinkai's conservation from 1148. Furthermore, the lower part under Buddha remains lost, which is consistent with Kansin's description. This suggests that Shinkai did not supplement this part of the painting. Therefore, I think Shinkai's conservation only included retouching the silhouette of landscape, adding blue to protect the pigment, and reinforcing the backside and edge of the image. This then begs the question of why did this level of conservation require a painter of exceptional ability such as Shinkai? One reason would be to retouch the ink lines through the careful brushwork of professional painter's hand. Another reason, which I want to underscore, is that perhaps Kansin also asked Shinkai to make a detailed copy of this treasured painting. It is my opinion that, in this case, the conservation project would need an exceptional painter who succeeded from a bloodline of court painters. Again, copying Buddhist painting was an important component of conservation during the Heian period. Unfortunately, no such copy or record thereof exists today. Another work attributed to Shinkai, however, offers evidence that the painter did indeed copy the MFA painting. The painting known as Kusha Mandara, you can see the slide, belongs to Todai's temple. Its main image of Shakyamuni Triad follows that of the MFA Buddha preaching at Vulture Peak painting. This suggests that Shinkai worked from the copy he had painted of the MFA painting. I have already pointed out that there were two approaches to the practice of Buddhist painting conservation in the Heian period. One would be conservation or preservation as it is currently understood. The other would be to make a copy of an older painting. The latter was more common during the Heian period. It is not difficult to imagine that once a copy was made, the original painting was almost always lost with the passage of time. The case of Shinkai in the 12th century is a rare example where Buddhist painting was conserved and preserved through to the present. The reason for this is perhaps because Kansin considered the MFA painting to be an ancient Indian painting instead of a Japanese work. I will now turn to Takao Mandara, which is accompanied by one of the oldest and most important documentary trails of painting preservation from the Heian and later Kamakura periods. From Kukai's time up until today, Takao Mandara has been preserved in Jingoji Temple. For the final portion of my talk, I would like to consider several aspects of conservation in the Heian and following Kamakura periods through a discussion of the Takao Mandara conservation process. At the beginning of my talk, I mentioned that in 821, a new copy was made from the original mandala that Kukai brought with him back from China. But after 10 years, the silk and pigment of this second mandala were damaged, and the Junna emperor ordered a third copy be made around 830. This third mandala is the current Takao Mandara. In the 45 odes sworn by the monks of Jingoji from Genryaku II, 1185, the monk Mongaku records Takao Mandara as having been painted by Kukai with gold pigment and entrusted to Jingoji Temple. But in the earlier part of the 12th century, the mandala was transferred to Ninnaji Temple, after which it was brought to many places before retired Emperor Goshirakawa finally donated it to Mount Koya. Mongaku, as the head priest of Jingoji, strongly urged Goshirakawa to enshrine the mandala at his temple. And in Genryaku I, 1184, the mandala returned to Jingoji. Unfortunately, from this succession of movements, Takao Mandara incurred significant damage. With the return of Kukai's Takao Mandara, Mongaku planned to have a new copy of the mandala made. Mongaku requested Minamoto no Yoritomo, the head of the Kamakura shogunate, and his wife Hojo Masako donate gold and silver pigment as well as twill silk. Mongaku then ordered monk painter Takuma Shoga to copy the original Takao Mandala. In Karok II, 1226, Shoga's copy was recorded as having been displayed in the Konpon Shingon Hall of Jingoji as the main icon. After Shoga made his copy, what happened to the original Takao Mandala? On the 24th day of the third month of Enkyo 1st, 1308, retired Emperor Go-Uda visited Jingoji and viewed the original Takao Mandala. In record of the conservation of Takao Mandala, Go-Uda laments that there appeared multiple places of damage on the image, and some foreign fragments had been collected and merely left in the box. As every icon was incomplete and lacking, it was difficult to recognize any of the Buddhist retinue. The image is torn, incomplete, and has lost the many of the original forms of the venerated icons. That is, the original mandala was only fragmentary with many of its foreign pieces scattered in its box, while the identities of Buddhist deities were unrecognizable. The terrible state of the original Takao Mandala led Go-Uda to order its conservation, which took 6 months from the first day of the 8th month of the 1308 until the 90th day of the first month of the following year. Judging from the condition of Takao Mandala at the beginning of the 14th century, the original Takao Mandala had probably been sealed in the box and neglected in the temple warehouse. In the Heian period, when a copy of an original painting was made, the original was neglected and left in the state of disrepair. In other words, during the Heian period, the main approach to conservation was to have a copy made of an original work. From the middle of the Kamakura period, however, people began to treat original paintings as treasures to preserve. There was thus a dramatic change in the meaning of conservation from the Heian to Kamakura periods, whereupon the preservation of Buddhist painting entered a new stage. The case of Takao Mandala demonstrates a change in conservation from copying to preservation. This also relates to a change in the mounting technique of Buddhist painting from the Heian period to the Kamakura period. Namely, Buddhist images painted on silk during the Heian period were not likely backed with paper and glue as they are today. You can see the how to lining, hanging scroll today. So several historical documents from the Heian to early Kamakura period describe the sewing of silk to the backside of a silk canvas as liner. This technique, however, made it difficult to preserve a work as Buddhist painting could be more easily damaged without a protective liner. Depending on the severity of the damage, the entire silk of a painting could even be ripped to shreds. This type of damage led to people of the Heian period to choose to have new copies of Buddhist painting made instead of attempting to conserve them. Towards the end of the Heian period, however, the skill level of Buddhist painting declined. Painters of the Kamakura period could not achieve the technical proficiency of Buddhist painting from this early golden age. This historical situation perhaps led people to treat older Buddhist paintings from past centuries as important treasures. As such, people began to conserve Buddhist painting from the end of the 11th to 12th centuries. This is one reason why we have a very small number of Buddhist paintings from 9th to 11th centuries. Conversely, one of the reasons why there are many more Buddhist paintings from the end of the 11th to 12th centuries is due to the change in painting technique and mounting. This shift also reflects how the meaning of conservation underwent a significant change. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masuki. I think we presented remarkable research, which seems, in one sense, to be the opposite of the story that's narrated by Dr. Takao Oku, in which he talks about the widespread Buddhist practice of repairing Buddhist images, from which emerges the practice of not repairing miraculous images. But in your case, it seems to be that there is a one-offness to Buddhist painting, which the practice was not to preserve Buddhist painting, but then slowly that changes over time. So a remarkable but kind of opposed development in painting versus sculpture. I think we'd like to now take questions from the audience for Dr. Masuki.
Thank you very much. I had my own question, but I think Yukio's question deserves a follow-up. So does this difference between painting and sculpture, the conservation of, lead us into a way of understanding changing attitudes to the objects themselves, to the ontologies of sculpture and painting? That's just the follow-up. But the question I wanted to ask had to do with this very small comment you made that perhaps the reason why it was okay for Chinkai to make a copy of the painting because the original was non-Japanese. And I think this is the first time we've talked about non-Japanese objects today. And I'm wondering what it might mean that a different origin could justify different conservation practice.
So I think that for the Kansin and Chinkai, the Indian painting is very rare and very precious one. So and I think the existence of this painting is very strong. The religious power to the Todaiji temples, as the temple has the strong image of the real image of the Shakyamuni Buddha in India. So I think they tried to prepare and conserve this rare image of the Buddha. And I think they also now take importance on the image to continue until the next generations. It's not good answer. Yeah. Yeah. So ですね。はいはい。So I think the sculpture is 3-dimension and the painting is 2-dimension. It is very different. And the sculpture is always exists here or in the temples. But the painting, for example, the hanging scrolls, once you rolling up, so there are no images. So I think the Heian period people think the sculptures was more powerful image than paintings. So Dr. Oku mentioned that about the miraculous efficacy of the Buddhist sculptures. But in the Buddhist painting, I think that there is no examples of such as miraculous power paintings in the history of the Buddhist painting. So I want to discuss about this theme with Dr. Oku, and but I think he always sleep in Tokyo. So yeah.
Thank you, Masuki Sensei. Mine is not so much a comment, but added information to contribute to your discussion of the Hokkaido Konpan Mandara in our museum's collection. In the early 2000s, the MFA underwent extensive pigment analysis of the painting and found that there was at least 2 different white pigments that were used. And so perhaps this substantiates your argument that the reasons why a skilled painter like Chinkai was enlisted to retouch and repair the painting and also perhaps to copy it, that was required as opposed to someone with perhaps lesser skills, and also to substantiate the idea that he did more than retouch the ink lines and the landscape outlines and so on, but in fact probably did extensive in painting and over painting as well.
Yeah. So Professor Takeo Izumi translates the paper about the Buddha preaching at about the big paintings. And I have already read that the paper. So there are many trace of the Chinkai's conservation. For example, you said the shell white. It was at that time it was not used in the Heian period or Nara period or Heian period. But recently, the Shosoin treasury also has the shell white to paint. So there is a possibility that in Nara period also the people use the shell white. So it is very difficult, and we must continue the study about these paintings. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that excellent talk. For me, one of the most important points is talking about the making of a copy as a form of preservation. And it reminds me that also for Heian and Kamakura period calligraphy, sometimes exact copies were made, sometimes tracing copies were made. And this was not only a way of preserving the work, but sometimes somebody wanted an extra
Mhm.
copy.
Mhm.
And the ones that are most fascinating is when the copy did not fix the damage, but actually did a perfect copy of the original damage. And so now I'm going to look at the Buddhist paintings to see if it was a tracing copy or if a copy was made that actually included
Mhm.
the original damage to make it look old.
Mhm.
So thank you
No.
for the talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. If the damage, I think if there is some kind of the religious reason of the damage on the paintings, the damage means the religious means. I think the painter must copy the damages as originals, but I cannot have the examples such paintings. Yeah, and in other stories about no masks. Oh, sorry, no masks. The no masks made many copies from the originals. The no masks always trace the damage of the originals. It is very important point to represent the original and to make a copy. Yeah, I think it is very interesting point how to treat the damage of the object on the copies. Yeah.
We are sure that it's actually someone was trying to make a second original version. And in some cases, we actually have evidence that the original was lost and the copy that survives today is actually a preserved copy. So the connections between your talk today and what happens in the history of Japanese calligraphy are very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.